The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust devils along the rutted road into Vulture City, Arizona. And Eleanor pressed her gloved hand against the window as her entire body trembled with equal parts hope and terror. It was September 1883, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man she had never met, a rancher named Graham Crawford, who had promised her safety, security, and a fresh start in his letters. The bruises on her arms had faded during the long journey west, but the scars on her back remained, hidden beneath layers of cotton and determination. She touched the high collar of her traveling dress, grateful that the Arizona heat had not yet forced her to shed the protective layers that kept her secrets safe. The town appeared like a mirage through the coach window, a collection of weathered buildings and sun-bleached wood that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. Vulture City had sprung up around the gold mine that gave it life, and though the richest veins had been tapped years ago, enough ore remained to keep the population steady at around 300 souls. Victoria watched as miners with dirt-crusted faces walked alongside well-dressed merchants, as children played in the street despite the heat, as women in practical dresses carried baskets and went about their daily business. It looked nothing like the crowded, sooty streets of Philadelphia, nothing like the elegant townhouse where her uncle had kept her locked away for 3 years after her parents died, where his rage and his whip had been her constant companions. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and the driver called out that they had reached their destination. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs as she gathered her small carpet bag, the only possession she had managed to escape with besides the clothes on her back. Everything else, the jewelry her mother had left her, the books she had loved, the pressed flowers from happier times, all of it remained in her uncle's house, payment for her freedom. She had written to Graham Crawford in response to his advertisement in the Philadelphia Gazette, and his letters had been kind, measured, speaking of loneliness and hard work and a desire for companionship. He had sent money for her passage without hesitation when she explained she was an orphan with limited means. He had no idea what she was running from, and she prayed he would never need to know. The driver helped her down from the coach, and Victoria stood on the dusty street with her bag clutched in both hands, searching the faces of the people who had gathered to watch the stage arrive. Her eyes found him immediately, a tall man in worn denim and a hat pulled low against the sun, standing apart from the others with his hands resting easily on his belt. He was younger than she had expected from his letters, perhaps 28 or 29, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. Their eyes met across the distance, and something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or recognition, though they had never seen each other before this moment. Graham Crawford removed his hat as he approached, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his temples and eyes the color of sun-warmed honey. He stopped a respectful distance away and nodded, his voice low and careful when he spoke. "Miss Eleanor, I am Graham Crawford." "Yes," Victoria said, and her own voice sounded strange to her ears, thin and uncertain. "I am pleased to meet you, Mr. Crawford." He studied her face for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. She was 22 years old but felt decades older, worn down by fear and pain until sometimes she barely recognized her own reflection. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her green eyes held shadows that no amount of sleep could erase. She was not beautiful, not anymore, though people had once said she favored her mother. Now she was simply a woman desperate enough to travel across a continent to marry a stranger. "The pleasure is mine," Graham said finally, and there was genuine warmth in his tone. I hope the journey was not too difficult. It was long, Victoria admitted, but I am grateful to have arrived safely. Graham gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby, a sturdy buckboard with 2 horses waiting patiently in the shade. My ranch is about an hour outside of town. I thought we could go to the church now if you are willing. Reverend Thompson is expecting us. Or if you need time to rest and collect yourself, we can wait until tomorrow. Victoria thought of her uncle, of the possibility that he might somehow track her down, might find a way to drag her back to Philadelphia, and the locked room and the whip he kept hanging on the wall like a promise. She thought of the bruises that were only just fading, of the way she still flinched at sudden movements, of the desperate need to belong to someone else, anyone else, so that she could never be claimed by him again. Now would be preferable, she said quietly. If that suits you. Something shifted in Graham's expression, a flicker of concern or perhaps understanding. He nodded slowly and gestured toward the wagon. Then now it shall be. The church was a simple wooden structure at the end of the main street, painted white and topped with a modest cross. Reverend Thompson was a jovial man with silver hair and kind eyes, and he performed the ceremony with 2 witnesses pulled from the street, a shopkeeper and his wife who smiled encouragingly at Victoria throughout the brief proceedings. She repeated the vows in a voice that shook only slightly, and when Graham slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt the weight of it like an anchor, holding her fast to this new life. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, Victoria Eleanor became Victoria Crawford, wife of a rancher she had known for less than an hour. The ride to the ranch passed in relative silence, with Graham pointing out landmarks and explaining the lay of the land while Victoria nodded and tried to absorb information through the fog of exhaustion that had settled over her. The landscape was unlike anything she had known in the East, all rust-colored rocks and scrubby vegetation, with mountains rising purple in the distance and the sky stretching vast and blue overhead. The heat pressed down like a physical thing, and Victoria could feel sweat gathering beneath her collar, but she did not dare loosen her dress. Graham's ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a main house built of adobe and wood with a covered porch, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved lazily in the afternoon sun. It was modest but well-maintained, and Victoria felt a strange tightness in her chest as Graham pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. This was her home now. This was her life. "It is not much," Graham said, and there was uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "But it is honest work, and the land is good." "It is more than I expected," Victoria said truthfully. "Thank you for bringing me here." Graham helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful and impersonal on her waist, and then retrieved her carpetbag from the back. He led her up the steps to the porch and through the front door into a main room that served as kitchen and living area both. The interior was sparse but clean, with a table and chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves lined with supplies, and doorways leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything spoke of a man living alone, functional rather than comfortable, and Victoria felt a surge of determination to make this place feel like a home, if only to justify her presence here. "I will show you the bedroom," Graham said, and Victoria's heart jumped into her throat. She had known this moment would come, had steeled herself for it during the long journey west. She was his wife now, and he had rights that the law and the church would support without question. She told herself it would be different from her uncle's brutality, that a husband's touch was sanctified and natural, but her body remembered only pain, and fear coursed through her veins like ice water. Graham must have seen something in her face because he stopped and held up one hand, his expression gentle. I mean only to show you where you will sleep. The room is yours, Victoria. I will not intrude upon your privacy until you are ready. I know we are strangers, and I will not force myself upon a woman who does not know me." The relief was so intense that Victoria's knees nearly buckled. She pressed one hand against the door frame to steady herself and managed a nod. "Thank you," she whispered. "That is very kind." "It is only decent," Graham said quietly. "Come, let me show you." The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a real bed frame and mattress, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the corral. Graham set her carpetbag on the bed and then stepped back into the doorway. "I will sleep in the barn tonight and for as long as you need. Take your time settling in. I will prepare some supper shortly." He left before she could respond, pulling the door closed behind him, and Victoria sank onto the edge of the bed as tears she had been holding back for months finally spilled down her cheeks. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking, overcome by exhaustion and relief and the strange, fragile hope that perhaps she had made the right choice in coming here. That evening they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread at the table, and Graham told her about the ranch in his quiet, measured way. He had 200 acres, mostly grazing land for the small herd of cattle he was building. He had 2 ranch hands who came during the day to help with the work, but went home to their own families at night. He had been alone for 2 years since his mother died, his father having passed when he was young. He had learned ranching from his uncle and had saved enough to buy this land outright. He spoke matter-of-factly, without boasting, and Victoria found herself relaxing incrementally as the meal progressed. "What about you?" Graham asked finally, his eyes searching her face across the table. "What brings a woman from Philadelphia all the way to Arizona to marry a stranger?" Victoria's hand tightened on her fork, and she carefully set it down on her plate. She had rehearsed this answer during her journey, had crafted a version of the truth that revealed nothing. "My parents died 3 years ago. I lived with relatives afterward, but it was not a happy situation. When I saw your advertisement, I thought perhaps a fresh start would be good for both of us." Graham was quiet for a moment, studying her with those honey-colored eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Were they cruel to you, these relatives?" Victoria's throat tightened, and she could not force words past the lump that formed there. She looked down at her plate and gave a single, jerky nod. "I am sorry," Graham said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice nearly undid her. "You are safe here, Victoria. I give you my word on that." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that it ached. Instead, she simply nodded again and changed the subject, asking about the horses she had seen, about the town, about anything that would steer the conversation away from her past. Graham allowed it, following her lead with easy grace, and by the time they cleared the dishes, some of the tension had eased from Victoria's shoulders. That night she lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the desert through the open window, the distant howl of coyotes and the rustle of wind through scrub brush. She thought of Graham sleeping in the barn, of the kindness he had shown her, of the ring on her finger that meant she belonged to him now instead of her uncle. She touched the scars on her back through her nightgown and allowed herself to imagine a future where they might fade, where she might learn to live without fear. It seemed impossible, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was not. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both strange and comforting. Victoria rose early and made breakfast while Graham tended to the animals. He showed her around the property, introducing her to the 2 ranch hands, Miguel and his son Tomás, who greeted her with respectful nods and shy smiles. She learned where the well was, where the chickens roosted, how to work the pump at the kitchen sink. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing years of bachelor living from the floors and walls, and organized the supplies with a precision that spoke of her need for control in at least this small way. Graham remained unfailingly patient and kind, giving her space while still engaging her in conversation during meals, asking her opinions on small matters around the ranch, treating her like a partner rather than property. He continued to sleep in the barn, and though Victoria knew the arrangement could not last forever, she was grateful for every night she had the bedroom to herself. Every morning she woke without fear of violence. 2 weeks into their marriage, Victoria was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when a sudden gust of wind tore one of Graham's shirts from her hands. She reached for it instinctively, stretching up on her toes, and felt her dress pull tight across her back. The sudden pressure on her healing scars sent a lance of pain through her body, and she gasped, dropping the clothespin she had been holding. The shirt tumbled away across the dirt, and Victoria stood frozen, one hand pressed against her back, breathing through the sharp ache. "Are you hurt?" Graham's voice came from behind her, closer than she had expected, and Victoria whirled around with a startled cry. He stood a few paces away, concern etched across his features, his hands raised slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "I am sorry. I did not mean to startle you. I saw you reach and thought perhaps you had injured yourself." "I am fine," Victoria said quickly, too quickly, and she could see from Graham's expression that he did not believe her. "It was merely a twinge, nothing to concern yourself with." Graham's eyes searched her face and then dropped to where her hand still pressed against her back. Something changed in his expression, a dawning understanding that made Victoria's stomach clench with dread. "Victoria," he said carefully, "are you in pain? Is something wrong with your back?" "No," she said, but the word came out strangled, and tears were already gathering in her eyes. "Please, just let me finish the laundry." Graham took a slow step forward, his movements telegraphed and gentle as if approaching a frightened horse. "I have tried to give you space and time to trust me. I have asked for nothing and demanded nothing. But if you are hurt, if you are in pain, I need to know. Let me help you, Victoria. Please." The kindness in his voice broke something inside her, some wall she had built to keep herself separate and safe. The tears spilled over and she found herself shaking her head helplessly. "You cannot help," she whispered. "No one can help. It is done." "What is done?" Graham asked, and he was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the lines that sun and hard work had etched around them. "Victoria, what happened to you?" She could not speak the words, could not give voice to 3 years of imprisonment and brutality. Instead, she turned her back to him, her hands trembling as she reached up and began to unfasten the long row of buttons that ran down the back of her dress. She heard Graham's sharp intake of breath, but did not stop, working the buttons free with shaking fingers until the fabric hung loose around her shoulders. She wore a chemise underneath, and she pulled the thin cotton down carefully, exposing her back to the Arizona sun and to her husband's gaze for the first time. The silence stretched long enough that Victoria began to shake in earnest, humiliation and fear warring inside her chest. The scars were extensive, a network of raised welts and healed lash marks that crisscrossed her back from shoulders to waist. Some were old and faded to silver, others still pink and healing. They told a story written in pain, and Victoria had lived it every day for 3 years. "Dear God," Graham breathed, and his voice was thick with an emotion Victoria could not name. She heard him move closer, felt the warmth of his presence behind her, and then his fingers touched her shoulder, so gentle it was barely a whisper against her skin. "Who did this to you?" "My uncle," Victoria said, and now that she had started, the words would not stop. After my parents died, I went to live with him. He was my father's brother, and I had nowhere else to go. He drank, and when he drank, he became violent. I tried to leave once, but he found me and brought me back. He locked me in the house and used his whip whenever I displeased him, which was often. Graham's hand remained on her shoulder, steady and warm, an anchor in the storm of her confession. How did you escape? The housekeeper felt sorry for me. She helped me sneak out one night when my uncle was away on business. She gave me enough money for the stagecoach, and I wrote to you from the station. I was terrified he would find me before I could leave, but the coach departed, and I made it here. Victoria's voice broke on the last word. I am sorry I did not tell you the truth before. I know I should have. I know it was wrong to deceive you, but I was afraid you would not want me if you knew. Afraid I would not want you, Graham repeated, and there was steel in his voice now, a hardness that made Victoria's breath catch. His hands moved to her upper arms, turning her gently to face him, and she clutched the front of her dress to keep it from falling. His eyes blazed with an intensity she had never seen before. Victoria, look at me. She forced herself to meet his gaze, expecting disgust or pity, but what she saw instead was fury, pure and righteous, directed not at her but at the man who had hurt her. Graham's jaw was set, his hands firm but careful on her arms. He will never touch you again, Graham said, and each word was a vow. Do you hear me? He will never lay a hand on you again. You are mine now, my wife, under my protection, and I swear on everything I hold sacred that you are safe. The conviction in his voice, the absolute certainty, broke the last of Victoria's carefully maintained composure. She collapsed forward against his chest, her hands still clutching her dress, and sobbed like a child. Graham's arms came around her immediately, holding her with a strength that felt protective rather than confining. He murmured soothing words she could not quite make out, his hand moving in slow circles on her hair, and he held her until the storm of tears finally subsided. When Victoria could breathe again, when she could think beyond the overwhelming relief of finally being held without fear, she pulled back slightly and looked up at Graham's face. I am sorry, she whispered. I have dampened your shirt. A ghost of a smile touched Graham's lips. I have endured worse. Come, let me help you with your dress. He turned her gently and refastened her buttons with careful fingers, and Victoria felt something shift between them, a barrier falling away to reveal the possibility of something real. When he was finished, he turned her back around and cupped her face in his calloused hands. I meant what I said. You are safe now, and when you are ready, when you choose it yourself, I will be honored to be your husband in truth. But there will be no pressure, no demands. You have had enough of those to last a lifetime. Victoria nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat, and Graham brushed a thumb across her cheek, wiping away the last of her tears. Now, I believe there is laundry that needs finishing, and I should get back to mending that fence line. But tonight we will talk more if you wish, or we will sit in comfortable silence. Whatever you need. He left her there, returning to his work as if the world had not just tilted on its axis, and Victoria stood in the Arizona sun with her heart beating a rhythm that felt almost like hope. That night, they sat on the porch as the sky turned from blue to purple to black, and Victoria told Graham everything. She spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, of parents who had loved her dearly and died too soon in a typhoid outbreak. She spoke of her uncle's kindness in the beginning, how it had curdled into resentment, and then rage as his business failed and his drinking increased. She spoke of locked doors and hunger, of the whip he wielded with methodical precision, of the isolation that had nearly broken her spirit. And Graham listened to every word, his face growing darker as the story unfolded, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by the telling, Graham was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If he comes looking for you, I will not let him take you. You understand that, do you not? I will stand between you and him, and he will have to kill me to get to you. That is a promise." "He may not come," Victoria said, though she did not truly believe it. Her uncle was a proud man who did not take kindly to being thwarted. "He may decide I am not worth the effort." "Perhaps," Graham allowed. "But if he does, I will be ready." They sat in silence after that, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast desert sky, and Victoria felt the weight of her secrets lifting from her shoulders. She had been afraid that confession would drive Graham away, that he would see her as damaged or broken, but instead he had seen her scars and offered protection, had heard her story and responded with fierce determination. It was more than she had dared to hope for. The weeks turned into months, and Victoria found herself settling into life on the ranch with an ease that surprised her. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to tend the vegetable garden she planted behind the house, to gather eggs from hens that protested loudly at the intrusion. She learned to ride one of the gentler horses, a mare named Daisy, and Graham taught her the boundaries of their land, showing her the best places to watch the sunset and the hidden canyon where water pooled year-round. She grew stronger, her body recovering from years of poor treatment, and the nightmares that had plagued her sleep began to fade. Graham remained patient beyond measure, giving her space while slowly, carefully, allowing her to see who he truly was. She learned that he was not prone to anger, that his temper was slow to rise and quick to cool. She learned that he was fair with his ranch hands, generous with his neighbors, and quietly faithful in a way that needed no church to validate it. She learned that he sang tunelessly when he thought no one was listening, that he had a weakness for sweet things, that he read dime novels by lamplight and always cried over the sad parts, though he tried to hide it. She learned that he was a good man in a way that had nothing to do with grand gestures and everything to do with small, daily kindnesses. And slowly, carefully, Victoria began to fall in love. It happened in increments, in moments so small she almost did not notice them accumulating. The way Graham always saved her the best piece of meat at dinner. The way he left wildflowers on the kitchen table sometimes, picked from the desert and offered without comment. The way he asked her opinion on ranch matters and actually listened to her answers, implementing her suggestions when they made sense. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, his eyes soft with an emotion she was almost afraid to name. One evening in late December, nearly 4 months after her arrival, Victoria was washing dishes after supper when Graham came up behind her. She heard him approach and did not flinch, which was itself a victory. He stopped a respectful distance away and cleared his throat. "Victoria, may I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, setting down the plate she had been scrubbing and turning to face him. Graham looked uncharacteristically uncertain, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I was wondering if perhaps you would consent to moving back into the house. Into the bedroom with me, I mean." Victoria's heart began to hammer, but it was anticipation rather than fear that made her pulse quicken. "Are you certain that is what you want?" Graham's eyes finally met hers, and there was no mistaking the longing in them. "I have wanted it since the day I first saw you, Victoria. You are my wife, and I care for you deeply, but only if you want it too, only if you are ready." Victoria took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and placed her hand on Graham's chest. She could feel his heart beating fast beneath her palm, could see the tension in his shoulders. "I am afraid," she admitted softly. "I do not know how to be with a man without fear. But I want to learn. I want to be your wife in truth, Graham. I want to share your life in your bed if you will teach me how." Graham's hand came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face. "We will go slowly. We have all the time in the world, Victoria. I will never hurt you, I swear it." "I know," Victoria said, and she realized it was true. She trusted this man with her body, with her heart, with everything she was and everything she hoped to become. That night Graham moved back into the house, into the bedroom that had been Victoria's alone for 4 months. They undressed separately, shyly, and when Graham saw Victoria's scars in the lamplight, he kissed every single one, his lips gentle on the raised tissue, his hands reverent on her skin. He made love to her with infinite patience, stopping whenever she tensed, checking constantly to make sure she was all right, and when it was over, Victoria lay in his arms and cried, not from pain but from the overwhelming realization that intimacy could be tender, that a man's touch could heal rather than harm. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is soon and perhaps foolish, but I love you, Graham Crawford." Graham's arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "It is not foolish," he said quietly. "I have loved you for weeks now, Victoria. I was simply waiting for the right time to tell you." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Victoria woke in the morning to find Graham's arm still draped protectively across her waist, she felt something she had not experienced in 3 years. She felt safe. She felt home. January brought cooler weather to the Arizona desert and news that would shatter Victoria's newfound peace. Graham returned from town one afternoon with supplies and a grim expression, and Victoria knew immediately that something was wrong. He waited until they were inside with the door closed before he spoke. "There is a man in town asking questions about a young woman who might have arrived on the stage last fall. Dark hair, green eyes, from Philadelphia." Victoria's blood turned to ice. She set down the sack of flour she had been holding and gripped the edge of the table to keep from swaying. "My uncle." "Most likely," Graham agreed. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. "He is staying at the hotel and has been showing your photograph to anyone who will look at it. He claims you are his ward and that you ran away from his care. He says you are not well, that you need to be returned to him for your own safety." "He is lying," Victoria said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "He wants me back so he can continue to hurt me. You know that, Graham." "I know," Graham said. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "And I will not let that happen, but we need to be smart about this. Legally, you are my wife now, not his ward. He has no claim on you, but that will not stop him from trying to take you by force if he discovers where you are." Victoria thought of her uncle's face, the cold rage in his eyes when he was displeased, the way he wielded his whip with practiced precision. She thought of going back to that life, to the locked room and the constant fear, and something fierce and determined rose up inside her. "I will not go back," she said flatly. "I would rather die than go back to him." "That will not be necessary," Graham said. His hands tightened on hers. "I will protect you, Victoria, but I need you to stay close to the ranch for now. Do not go into town, do not go anywhere alone. Can you do that?" Victoria nodded, her throat too tight for words, and Graham pulled her into his arms, holding her close while her mind raced with fear and possibilities. She had been a fool to think she could escape so easily, that her uncle would simply let her go. Of course he had followed her. Of course he wanted her back. She was his property in his eyes, a thing to be controlled and punished, and men like him did not give up their power willingly. The next few days passed in a state of tense watchfulness. Graham kept a rifle close at hand, and Miguel and Tomás were told to be alert for strangers approaching the ranch. Victoria stayed inside more than usual, peering out windows at every sound, her stomach twisted with anxiety. She slept poorly, plagued by nightmares of her uncle finding her, dragging her back to Philadelphia, locking her away forever. Graham held her through the worst of it, his presence a comfort even when sleep would not come. On the fourth day, Miguel came galloping up to the house at mid-morning, his horse lathered and his face grim. "There is a man on the road heading this way, older, well-dressed, driving a rented buggy. He stopped and asked me if this was the Crawford ranch." Graham was already reaching for his rifle. "Did you tell him?" "I said I did not know English," Miguel replied, "but he will find it anyway. The road leads here." "Go home to your family," Graham said. "Take Tomas with you. This is not your fight." Miguel hesitated, his eyes moving to Victoria. "Senora Crawford is a good woman if you need help." "I will handle it," Graham said firmly. "But thank you, my friend." After Miguel left, Graham checked the rifle and then turned to Victoria. "Stay inside. No matter what happens, you stay inside and you stay quiet. You understand?" Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could face her uncle, but fear had stolen her courage. She nodded mutely and watched as Graham stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loosely in his hands, his stance relaxed but ready. She did not have to wait long. Within minutes, a buggy appeared on the road, pulled by a single horse and driven by a man Victoria recognized instantly despite the distance. Her uncle looked older than she remembered, his hair more gray, his face more lined, but his posture was the same, rigid and self-righteous. He pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the house and climbed down slowly, his eyes fixed on Graham. "Good afternoon," her uncle called out, his voice carrying the cultured tones of old Philadelphia money. "I am looking for my ward, Victoria Eleanor. I have reason to believe she may have come here." "There is no Victoria Eleanor on this property," Graham said evenly. "Only Victoria Crawford, who is my wife." Her uncle's face darkened. "She had no right to marry without my consent. She is not of sound mind, and any marriage would be invalid. I have come to collect her and return her to proper care." "The law would disagree with you," Graham said. His voice remained calm, but Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders. Miss Eleanor was of legal age to marry. She required no guardian's permission. "She is now legally my wife, and you have no claim on her." "She is disturbed," her uncle insisted, taking a step forward. "She has told lies about me, I am certain. Whatever she has said, it is the product of a disordered mind. She requires medical care and confinement for her own good." "What she required was escape from a man who beat her with a whip," Graham said, and now steel entered his voice. "I have seen the scars on her back. I know what you did to her. And I am telling you now as clearly as I can that you will leave this property and you will never come back. Victoria is under my protection now, and you will never touch her again." Her uncle's face flushed red, and his hand moved toward his coat. "You have no right to keep her from me. She is my responsibility, my burden to bear. Give her to me, or I will take her by force." The rifle in Graham's hands came up smoothly, the barrel pointing directly at her uncle's chest. "I would strongly advise against that course of action." The two men stood frozen, facing each other across the dusty yard, and Victoria watched from the window with her heart in her throat. She could see the calculation in her uncle's eyes, the way he assessed Graham's stance, the steadiness of the rifle, the absolute conviction in his expression. She could see the moment her uncle realized he would not win this confrontation, that Graham was not a man who could be intimidated or bought. "This is not over," her uncle said finally, his voice thick with rage. "I will go to the authorities. I will have this farce of a marriage annulled. She belongs to me, and I will have her back." "You are welcome to try," Graham said, But I think you will find that the law takes a dim view of men who abuse their wards, especially when those wards have witnesses willing to testify about the scars they carry. Now get off my property before I lose my patience." Her uncle stared at Graham for a long moment, hatred blazing in his eyes, and then he turned and climbed back into the buggy. He wheeled the horse around with unnecessary force and drove back down the road, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Graham stood on the porch until the buggy disappeared from view, and then he lowered the rifle and turned toward the door. Victoria met him as he stepped inside, and he barely had time to set the rifle aside before she was in his arms, shaking with reaction and relief. "He will come back," she said against Graham's chest. "You know he will not give up." "Perhaps," Graham said, "but he is a coward at heart, Victoria. Men who prey on those weaker than themselves always are. He came here expecting to find you alone or with a husband who would be easily convinced to hand you over. Instead, he found a man willing to shoot him. That changes the equation considerably. What if he does go to the authorities? What if he convinces them to annul our marriage?" Graham pulled back and cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Then we will fight him in court. We will show them your scars. We will bring witnesses who can testify to your state when you arrived here and how you have thrived since. We will make sure everyone knows what kind of man your uncle truly is. And if all else fails, we will leave Arizona. We will go to California or Oregon or anywhere he cannot find us. But I will not let him take you, Victoria. Not now, not ever." The conviction in his voice, the absolute certainty, finally allowed Victoria to breathe again. She nodded and let Graham pull her close, and they stood together in the quiet house while the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and painted everything gold. Her uncle did not return to the ranch, but the shadow of his presence lingered. Graham made inquiries in town and learned that he had indeed gone to the sheriff, making claims about Victoria's mental state and demanding the marriage be investigated. But the sheriff, a fair-minded man named Jack Morrison, had listened to the story and then politely informed her uncle that wives were under their husband's protection in the territory, that Victoria had been of legal age to marry, and that without evidence of fraud or coercion, there were no grounds to intervene. Frustrated but not defeated, her uncle had left Vulture City, though he made threats about returning with lawyers and court orders. Graham and Victoria discussed their options long into the night. They could stay and fight, trusting in the law and their own testimony to protect them. They could leave and start fresh somewhere new, though that would mean abandoning the ranch Graham had worked so hard to build. Or they could wait and see if her uncle would eventually give up, deciding that Victoria was not worth the continued effort and expense. In the end, they decided to stay. Victoria refused to be driven from the home she had built, the life she had finally found, and Graham supported her decision without hesitation. They consulted with a lawyer in town who confirmed that their marriage was legal and binding, and who agreed to represent them if her uncle attempted to pursue the matter in court. They gathered statements from Miguel and Tomás about Victoria's condition when she arrived and her demeanor since, from Reverend Thompson about the marriage ceremony, from neighbors who could testify to Graham's character. They built a case, preparing for a battle that might never come. Months passed, winter giving way to spring, and there was no further word from Philadelphia. Victoria began to relax incrementally, to believe that perhaps her uncle had indeed given up, that the cost of pursuing her had finally outweighed his desire for revenge. She threw herself into life on the ranch with renewed energy, expanding her garden, learning to help with the cattle, even trying her hand at training a young colt that Graham had purchased. She laughed more easily, smiled without shadows in her eyes, and allowed herself to imagine a future that extended beyond fear. In April, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Graham one evening after supper, her hands trembling as she placed them over her still flat stomach. Graham's face transformed, joy and wonder and a touch of fear all crossing his features at once. He pulled her into his arms carefully as if she might break, and whispered promises against her hair about protecting her, caring for her, loving their child with everything he had. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Victoria bloomed under Graham's attentive care. He insisted she rest more, take on fewer chores, and he hovered like a worried hen until she laughed and shooed him away. The summer heat was oppressive, and Victoria spent the worst of the afternoons inside where it was cooler, sewing tiny clothes and imagining the baby who would wear them. Graham built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges, and set it beside their bed where Victoria could reach it easily. In late October, on a cool evening when the desert had finally released the day's heat, Victoria went into labor. Graham sent to Maz for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson who had delivered half the babies in Vulture City. And then he stayed by Victoria's side through the long night, holding her hand and offering encouragement when the pain became too much to bear. The baby arrived just after dawn, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. Graham cried when Mrs. Patterson placed the baby in his arms, and Victoria, exhausted and overwhelmed, felt her heart swell with a love so fierce it nearly stopped her breath. They named him Gabriel, after Graham's father, and he became the center of their world. Victoria had feared she would not know how to be a mother, that her own childhood had been cut too short to leave her with useful memories. But motherhood came as naturally as breathing. She nursed Gabriel and changed him and soothed him when he cried. And Graham was a constant presence, helping with middle-of-the-night feedings and taking the baby so Victoria could rest. They moved through the days in a haze of exhaustion and joy, learning the rhythms of parenthood together. A letter arrived in December, nearly a year and a half after Victoria had fled Philadelphia. It was addressed to her in an unfamiliar hand, and she opened it with trembling fingers while Graham watched from across the room. Inside was a single page, written in careful script by a lawyer she did not know. Her uncle had died of a stroke the previous month. There would be no further pursuit, no legal challenges, no threats to her safety or her marriage. She was free. Victoria read the letter 3 times, unable to quite believe it, and then she passed it to Graham with shaking hands. He read it slowly, his expression grave, and then he looked up at her with something like relief in his eyes. "It is over," he said quietly. "You are safe now, Victoria, truly safe." The tears came then, great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Graham gathered her into his arms while Gabriel slept peacefully in his cradle, and he held her while she cried for the girl she had been, for the years stolen from her, for the fear that had shaped her life for so long. But she cried too with relief, with gratitude, with the overwhelming realization that she had survived, that she had built a life worth living, that she was loved and safe and free. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch demanded hard work and long hours, and there were seasons when rain did not come and others when it came too much. There were cattle that sickened and horses that went lame and crops that failed despite their best efforts. But through it all, Victoria and Graham faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthening with every challenge overcome. Gabriel grew into a bright, energetic child who followed Graham around the ranch and pestered his mother with endless questions. When he was 3, Victoria became pregnant again, and this time she carried twins, a boy and a girl they named Grant and Violet. The house that had once felt empty with just Graham now overflowed with noise and laughter and the chaos of raising small children. Victoria sometimes looked around at the life she had built and felt dizzy with the impossibility of it, with the knowledge that she had once believed herself beyond saving. The scars on her back remained, faded now to silver lines that Graham still kissed on quiet nights when the children were asleep. They were a part of her story, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. She did not hide them anymore, wearing dresses that showed her arms and neck without shame, secure in the knowledge that she was more than what had been done to her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Graham surprised her with a trip into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant. Victoria wore her best dress, the green one that Graham said matched her eyes, and they left the children with Miguel's wife and rode into Vulture City feeling young and carefree. Over a meal of roast chicken and potatoes, Graham reached across the table and took her hand. "I have something I want to say to you." Victoria smiled and laced her fingers through his. "What is it?" 10 years ago, I placed an advertisement in a newspaper asking for a wife. I was lonely and hopeful and had no idea what I was truly asking for. When you stepped off that stagecoach, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, but I also saw the fear in your eyes, the shadows that lived there. I promised myself I would be patient, that I would earn your trust, but I never imagined I would be so lucky as to earn your love. Graham's voice was rough with emotion. "You have given me everything, Victoria. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You took a broken life and made it whole, and I want you to know that I would do it all again, every moment, every challenge, just to have you by my side." Tears gathered in Victoria's eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from being overwhelmed with gratitude and love. "You saved my life, Graham Crawford. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had almost given up hope. You showed me what love could be, what marriage could be, when I thought those things were forever beyond my reach. I am the lucky one, and I thank God every day that I found your advertisement, that I had the courage to answer it, that you were exactly the man your letters promised you would be." They stayed in town that night, in a room at the hotel, and made love slowly, quietly, with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of two people who still chose each other every single day. In the morning they rode back to the ranch, to their children and their responsibilities and their life together, and Victoria felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. More years passed, bringing more changes and more blessings. Gabriel grew tall and strong, learning ranching from his father and developing a gift for working with horses that made Graham proud. Grant followed in his brother's footsteps, though he was more interested in the business side of things, in numbers and ledgers and planning for the future. Violet was fierce and independent, riding as well as her brothers and insisting she would run her own ranch someday. Victoria watched her children grow with a heart full of love and determination, that they would never know the kind of fear she had experienced, that they would always feel safe and valued and free. When Victoria was 35, she and Graham added a 4th child to their family, another girl they named Grace. She was a surprise and a delight, arriving a full decade after the twins, and she brought new energy to the household. Gabriel was already helping run the ranch by then, and Grant was apprenticing with a businessman in town, learning accounting and trade. Violet helped Victoria with the household work and complained loudly about being the only girl until Grace arrived. The ranch prospered under Graham's steady management and Victoria's careful planning. They expanded their land holdings, purchased more cattle, and built a reputation for quality stock and honest dealing. They became pillars of the community, hosting barn dances and church socials, helping neighbors in need, and raising their children to value hard work and kindness above all else. On a warm evening in May, when Victoria was 48 and Graham was 54, they sat on the porch together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Gabriel was married now with children of his own, living on a section of the ranch Graham had deeded to him. Grant had opened a successful business in Vulture City and was courting a schoolteacher. Violet had shocked everyone by marrying a lawyer from Phoenix and moving to the city, though she visited often and insisted she would return to the desert eventually. Grace, at 13, was inside practicing her piano, the notes drifting through the open windows. "You ever think about how different life might have been?" Victoria asked, her head resting on Graham's shoulder. "If I had not seen your advertisement, if I had not had the courage to answer it." Graham was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her waist. "I try not to. The thought of you still trapped in that house, or worse, is more than I can bear. I thank God every day that you found me, that you trusted me enough to come here." "I am grateful too," Victoria said softly. "For all of it, even the hard parts. They made me who I am, and they brought me to you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, and Victoria thought about the girl she had been, the one who had arrived in Vulture City with nothing but a carpetbag and a heart full of fear. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. She had been transformed by love and safety and time into someone new, someone stronger, someone who could look at her scars and see survival instead of shame. "He'll never touch you again," Graham had promised her that day in the yard, when he had seen her scars and understood the depth of what she had endured. It had been more than a promise about her uncle, more than just physical protection. It had been a vow that she would never again know that kind of fear, that kind of pain, that kind of helplessness. And he had kept that promise every single day of their marriage, through patience and kindness, and an unwavering commitment to her safety and happiness. Victoria turned her face up to Graham and kissed him, slow and sweet, pouring 25 years of love and gratitude into the gesture. When she pulled back, Graham smiled at her, that same warm smile that had made her feel safe from the very beginning. "I love you, Victoria Crawford." "I love you too," Victoria said. "Now and always." They stayed on the porch until the sky grew fully dark and Grace called them inside for the evening meal. Walking into the house with Graham's hand in hers, surrounded by the life they had built together, Victoria felt a profound sense of peace. The past would always be part of her story, the scars would always mark her skin, but they no longer defined her. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a survivor, a woman who had taken her broken pieces and forged them into something beautiful. And as she sat down to dinner with her husband and youngest daughter, as they bowed their heads to give thanks for the food and the day and each other, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly what she had been searching for when she climbed onto that stagecoach so many years ago. She had found home, she had found love, she had found herself. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Graham's hair turned completely silver, and Victoria's showed threads of gray at her temples. They weathered droughts and good seasons, births and deaths, weddings and funerals. They celebrated as their grandchildren arrived, as the ranch continued to grow and prosper, as their children found their own paths in the world. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. When Graham died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71, Victoria grieved deeply, but without bitterness. They had been given 42 years together, more than many couples could hope for, and she cherished every memory. She continued to run the ranch with Gabriel's help, refusing to slow down despite her own advancing years. She lived to see great-grandchildren born, to watch as the small ranch Graham had started grew into a thriving legacy that would pass down through generations. Victoria died at the age of 83, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her hand held gently by Violet, who had returned to Arizona just as she had always promised. Her last thoughts were of Graham, of the promise he had made to protect her, of the life they had built together from courage and hope and unwavering love. She closed her eyes peacefully, a smile on her face, and slipped away to wherever it was that people went when their stories ended. They buried her next to Graham on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read simply, Victoria Crawford, beloved wife and mother. But those who knew her story understood that the words carved in stone could never capture the truth of who she had been. She had been a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had refused to let her past define her future. She had been broken and made herself whole. She had been afraid and found courage. She had been lost and discovered home in the arms of a cowboy who saw her scars and promised she would never be hurt again, a promise he kept with every breath until his last. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.